Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is our newest edition of Diplomacy Talks, and I have a personal pleasure, to greet once again, after this audio podcast made a year and a half ago, once again, His Excellency Oleksandr Aleksandrovych, Ambassador of Ukraine. Welcome.
My pleasure too, dear Žikica. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Laskavo prosimo. We have some news during the last 18 months. The biggest news is, of course, the pandemic of COVID-19. Nobody actually thought in February or January 2020 that the world was going to stop completely, to be ground to a halt during the 2020 and even 2021. It's unfortunately still pretty much closed, but it's a little bit better than last year. Can you tell me about the situation in Ukraine? How the vaccination is going on? What about the freedoms of people? Can they go to the beaches, cafes? The summer season is starting. Odessa is, I believe, bustling with life. Kiev, I remember beautiful cafes and restaurants in the open. It was the city, maybe the fullest of life that I visited in my life. So I would like to ask you how the situation is going with the vaccination, with the economical factors, considering COVID-19 pandemic.
Life is picking up in Ukraine as everywhere else, which is a very positive development. There's no quarantine at present. People are allowed to visit restaurants, cafes, museums, to walk in the parks, of course. There are some limitations on closed meetings in small spaces, but otherwise there's basically no limitations. People are traveling all around the country. People can travel abroad. Of course, with the vacation season, a lot of people go to the Black Sea, including your favorite Odessa. As for vaccinations, at present, close to 2 million people have got their vaccines, which may not be enough for a 42 million population nation, but there were some initial delays at the beginning with the delivery of vaccines. But at present, the process is accelerating. Life is better and better. Taking this opportunity, I wish also to praise the Serbian government, since I live in Serbia at present, for their very effective policies regarding the pandemic, both as regard the testing of the people. Now the vaccination process is excellent. I believe that around 35% of all Serbs have already received 2 doses, but also regarding the economic and financial help extended both to individuals and to small businesses in Serbia. And also your wise policy of accumulating a cocktail of different vaccines, so that Serbia has become also a very popular destination for foreigners to come here and get their vaccination. So I would say that in fighting the pandemic, Serbia is a little bit ahead of Ukraine, but also you're a smaller country, and Ukraine is trying to do its best. And I believe that the summer season will be okay for both of us. As for the rest of the year, a lot will depend on the development of those new alterations of the virus, the Delta, the Lambda, and so on, and whether the vaccines will be able to cope with these new variants of the virus. But the most important thing, both for Ukrainians and for Serbs as regards this pandemic, is to strengthen their individual immunity and to still use some protective measures as distancing and masks.
Great. What if we want to go to Odessa this year? or to Kiev. There is a new line. I think it's Sky. What's the name of the company? I forgot the name.
It's Sky Up. At present, we have
Yes.
one company operating between Belgrade and Kyiv, the direct aviation connection, and this is the Windrose company. This is a Ukrainian company which flies on Mondays and Fridays. Until very recently, Sky Up, a Ukrainian low cost, was also operating this line, but they decided to postpone it for a few months. Why? Because they have very few aircraft and they are trying to use them on other destinations, mostly for seaside resorts. So, but I'm sure they will come back to Belgrade-Kyiv connection probably this autumn. I hope also that Serbia, which used to operate the same connection, will resume its activity also maybe later this year. A lot will depend on the development of the pandemic. But definitely you can come to Ukraine. We have a visa-free regime for up to 30 days. For entering Ukraine, the requirements are very similar to what they have in the EU, in other countries of Europe, which is either you have a COVID vaccination certificate or a quick test, not necessarily PCR test, but antibody test, but just a quick test, or if you have a proof that you had recently had that disease and now you have this antibody. So nothing special.
So the vaccination certificate is okay to have
yes,
two vaccines?
We are now in the process of bilateral agreement about mutual recognition of our vaccination certificates. But since both Ukraine and Serbia are using the EU model for digital, green COVID vaccine certificate, I believe there will be no problem whatsoever in agreeing on that.
It's great news. It's a great news because lots of people have been vaccinated and they expect to be received without any further tests in friendly countries, and even some Western countries in Western Europe that don't allow tourist visits at all. It's really sad. They're pretty much closed except for the essential and business travel. And I'm really happy that the tourists from Serbia would be able to visit Ukraine and the beautiful seaside, and that's what I'm going to promote on our newest website, Kultura na dlanu, culture on our palm of in our hand.
I'm very happy
so it's great. If the people can go, I will definitely recommend going to Kiev and Odessa. It's wonderful.
But by the way, just to finish on that subject, I believe that the Sky Up Airlines, on one of their last trips before suspending the connection, they took about a dozen of popular Serbian bloggers to Ukraine on a trip. So they are either at present on the territory of Ukraine or just travel to Ukraine, or maybe on the point of travel. So, which is very good news, which will be in addition to your efforts to promote my country. I'm very happy.
Fantastic. Great. So first of all, I would like to congratulate you for the winning yesterday against North Macedonia, and it's too bad that Ukraine unfortunately lost in the last 15 minutes the match against a very strong team of the Netherlands. But now the chances are really much better than a few days ago. Tell me, what do you expect from Zbirna? I think it's the name of the team, from the national team. Are the Ukrainians having high hopes for this Euro 2020, which is in 2021?
Right. Even though Ukraine lost to the Netherlands in the first game, but that game, even still, I believe, is considered to be the most interesting until now at Euro 2020. It was very dynamic. There were a lot of goals, 5 goals, and a lot of interesting and exciting moments. It is very important that the players show not only the good results, but also the results that please and entertain the people, the public, because this is one of the functions of the sport as well. Well, we were, of course, happy to win over our good friends, Northern Macedonia. And since Austria lost to Holland as well, so if I'm not mistaken, mathematically, it will be enough for us to have a draw against Austria to get to the next round. But we will see. We will see in 3 days how it will finish. But our team is quite strong. What I like is that their good coordination and their possession of the ball and also the good tactics provided by famous Andriy Shevchenko. So I'm quite optimistic, at least as regards leading the group and going further. We will see later how it will develop.
Great. I wish good luck for Zbirna of Ukraine. And there is one question that we can't skip, because there was something about the shirts of the Ukrainian team. There was some misunderstanding, or I don't know. Some would say scandal, but basically there was a Ukrainian map on the front, including Crimea and everything. So it's okay, of course, because it's the same like Kosovo, Serbia, and everything else. But on the inner or something like that, inner side, on the back side, there was written Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava, which was 50% lost now, I believe. I believe that Heroyam Slava is not anymore on the...
It is still on the shirt, on the inside of the shirt, but on a different spot. It's directly, it's here, again, the heart, but on the inner side.
Oh,
it's
okay.
depicted on the map, but on the other side of the shirt.
Okay.
Anyways, the only...
Can you explain? Can you explain what's the problem with the salute? Some people compare it to Zadom Spremni from Croatia. Some even go to the comparison of Nazi. But some people say no, it's perfectly normal Ukrainian salute, like patriotic stuff. Can you explain it? Yeah. Can you explain from your...
We have the same Slava Ukraini, which is glory to Ukraine, which is like Živela Serbia. And the answer is Heroyam Slava, glory to heroes, meaning glory to all those people who were or are fighting for the independence and prosperity of Ukraine. There's no other connotation to that. Of course, Russia was very unhappy, first of all, because of the map, because it showed clearly what the international community is thinking about the illegal annexation of Crimea, because that uniform of the football players was approved by UEFA back in December last year, with all those slogans, with all the maps, with all the words, and nothing happened until a few days before the beginning of the championship. So Russia was the only country to politicize the issue. In fact, when you see the players on the screen, you can hardly see those words or the map because those are just the contours. So it was more a political issue for Russia because the world once again learned about the Russian aggression against sovereign independent Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you for answer and clarification. One more question. Now we're getting a little bit serious, more serious, about Belarus and the crisis in Belarus. It's affecting you directly because it's your one of your biggest neighbors and northern neighbor, and lots of people have connections and businesses and everything. And now after this landing of Ryanair flight, some countries impose sanctions over Belarus. And can you tell me what Ukraine can do to pacify the situation? Because Belarus tried really hard to pacify the situation after 2014 and everything. There was a Minsk process. I mean, they held meetings in Minsk as a brother country of all of you. Can you tell me what is the position of Ukraine towards Belarus? Because it's very important for Belarusians to know what, and for the world. We know we know the stance of Poland and Lithuania and Russia, but what is your position?
Okay. Well, we have a lot of sympathy for the people of Belarus, which we strongly support, including their indispensable rights to have free and fair elections and their rights to free assembly and free manifestation. As for the Minsk process, which started in 2014, of course, on the one hand, we are grateful for Belarus for providing this negotiation platform. On the other hand, Belarus is not a mediator. They just provided the venue, their capital, and the premises. That's all. As for the situation in Belarus at present, I should start with their presidential elections last August. And after those elections, following the massive protests by the people and the crackdown by the government, by the security forces, which led to many casualties, human casualties, we did not recognize the results of those elections, and Ukraine does not recognize Oleksandr Lukashenko as the legitimate president of Belarus. So it started not with the interception of the aircraft at present, it started back in the at the end of the summer and autumn of last year. So we call upon Belarus to hold new elections, this time free and fair elections. As regards the interception of the airplane, this is a clear act of state terrorism. So in this particular case, Ukraine is aligning itself fully with the position of Poland, Lithuania, and other EU nations. And of course, Ukraine is continuing to have people-to-people contacts with Belarus. We have some limited economic cooperation, but we have no political contacts whatsoever because we do not consider the current president as legitimate. But we also discourage our people from traveling to Belarus because the security forces in Belarus are like Russian FSB. They can catch you anytime without any reason, torture you and put you into prison. So it is a risk for any Ukrainian, even who has no problem with the law in Belarus, to travel to Belarus, because that regime is an authoritarian, ruthless regime. And
can the people cross to Belarus from Ukraine, and do you have any kind of economic sanctions? Are you joining?
We have political sanctions. Regarding many politicians who participated in the crackdown after the elections. Okay. Of course, people can travel. We have no ban on travel. We have no visa requirements, and we do not stop people from traveling. But there were many cases in the past, even before the Belarusian elections, when many Ukrainians were captured by Belarusian security forces and held as captive there. So it is quite dangerous there.
Okay. Talking about Minsk process, how is the situation going with the de-escalation in Donbas region? Donetsk, Luhansk, and what about it's the first priority, of course. It's been 7 years now, and there are people, there are children that are going to go to school this September in Donetsk, for example, without knowing nothing about the rule of Ukraine. It's a long time. Is it going on? I know that the first president, I think it is the first president, Kravchuk.
Yes.
He's really Kuchma or Kuchma. Is it Kuchma in the process as a negotiator? I think
Kuchma was before. Now it's Kravchuk. Yes.
Yes. So. We have former presidents of Ukraine engaging in this process, in talks and negotiations. Can you tell me, after this Geneva meeting between Mr. Putin and Mr. Biden, two presidents, they made a little bit of de-escalation between the two. Can we expect something in the future? What is the expectation of Ukraine after the new president came to power in America, and all these meetings and
okay. It's a long question, and I will try to shorten my answer because we should distinguish between the Biden-Putin meeting in Geneva, who discussed many issues, including Ukraine, and the war by Russia against Ukraine. Even when Ukraine got its current president, President Zelensky, many in Serbia were asking me, so will it improve the situation? Will the war stop now? Will the new Ukrainian president make efforts to stop the war? And I always answered that the person who can stop the war like that immediately is the person who started the war, which is President Putin. So it doesn't matter, unfortunately, who is the president of Ukraine or what kind of, political system we have in Ukraine. It is up to Russia to stop the war because they initiated the war. It is not the Ukrainian troops, military, who are near Moscow. It is the Russian troops who are on the territory of Ukraine. So the Minsk process, the trilateral negotiation group, and all those other formats, they can be helpful as an addition to huge political, diplomatic, and economic pressure which Ukraine and its allies must exert upon Russia to stop its hostile activities against Ukraine. We must show to President Putin that the price of his war against Ukraine will be so high that he cannot continue with that war anymore. And this is exactly what President Biden delivered to President Putin between their meetings in Geneva. And what is most important, that meeting took place after all those summits by Western democracies, G7 summit, NATO summit, EU summit, US-EU summit, and so on. So President Biden was expressing not only his personal or his country's view, but the entire democratic world's view on what they think about the Kremlin regime. And in all those documents of all those summits, there was an unequivocal support for sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, a very strong commitment to defend Ukraine against Russian aggression. And in all the strategic papers, including new EU strategic paper on relations with Russia, which is called Push Back, Constrain, and Engage, including the phraseology in the NATO communique, which views Russia as a threat to Euro-Atlantic community. So in all those documents, there was a very strong support for Ukraine. And I believe that Mr. Putin understood it very well when he was meeting with President Biden. So now evaluating their meeting as such, I would be very cautious about what will happen next, because both parties, they stressed their positions, but I did not see any intent on the part of President Putin to acknowledge what he's doing to Ukraine and to many other countries. So it remains to be seen. It remains to be seen. Many people compare the current situation to the Cold War time. I would say that the current situation is much worse than the Cold War time. And the EU statement clearly says that they expect even worse situation with Russia in the future. So what it remains for Ukraine to do is simply to build a very strong army, to build a strong economy, and to stick together with its partners in Europe and across the Atlantic, but also with Japan, Australia, South Korea, other democracies, to defend itself against the threat from the East. And I should emphasize that Article 51 of the United Nations Charter allows any country to defend itself with all possible means.
But what about the things that were signed and maybe not implemented, maybe partially implemented, like the elections in the two self-proclaimed republics on the east of Ukraine, and the police forces the demilitarization of the, what's happening with that. That was all signed, and there were some misunderstandings. Which step goes first? They said that something goes first, and they said no. First we have to do. What's the problem? Where it was stuck?
The explanation is very simple. Russian troops are on the territory of Ukraine. They have no place to be there. It is not Ukraine which is causing, aggression against Russia. Ukrainian troops are not on the territory of Russia. It is the Russian troops on the territory of Ukraine. Everybody knows that. There are thousands of artillery systems, hundreds of tanks, hundreds of anti-missile air defense systems. It's impossible to buy it in a shop, as Mr. Putin says. So in the 7th year of the war, everybody knows that it is Russia who is there in Ukraine. It doesn't matter whether you have this insignia on the uniform or not. They have a very good saying in English: if it walks as a duck, if it talks as a duck, then it is a duck. If Russia supports that army in eastern Ukraine and in Crimea with weapons, armaments, fuel, troops, food, everything, then it is their army. Doesn't matter what it says on their uniform. So coming back to your question regarding those Minsk agreements, who should do first what, there's a very clear point. I believe it's number 2, directly after point number 1, which is ceasefire. Point number 2 is withdrawal of all foreign troops from the territory of Ukraine. So believe me, if Russia pulls back its troops and its mercenaries, the war, the hot phase of the war, will end in a week. In a week. Then we can talk about the political process, because speaking of elections, elections can be held according to the OSCE principles, which is also acknowledged by Russia, which is in the Minsk agreements. But the OSCE principles do not envisage having elections with people with the guns on that territory, having that huge army, about 40,000 people.
So basically, what Ukraine is saying, withdraw the troops, demilitarize the area, and we'll have elections. What they say, it's like
control of our border, and then we can invite all the international community to monitor, the political dialogue, the building of parties, media, political process, elections, and so on and so forth.
And they say vice versa. They say, let's have first the elections, and then we'll demilitarize it.
Right, because they want to keep that situation in Donbass as a cancer cell for Ukraine. They want Ukraine to become as current Donbass, not the other way around. Anyways, this is our territory, and it is not about this Russian propaganda saying, protecting Russian people, Russian language, population, and so on. In the Ukrainian army, half of the people are Russian speaking. In Ukrainian Maidan of 2014, half of the people were Russian speaking. And the Russian speaking Ukrainian soldiers are fighting against the Russian soldiers, the official Russian army. So it is not the question of language or religion as in the Balkans. In that sense, the situation is very different between Ukraine and Russia than what was in the Balkans in the 1990s.
That reminded me of something President Zelensky said during the wonderful New Year's speech in 2020, or I believe it was like 31st of December 2019. He spoke in Russian, in Ukrainian, in Crimean Tatar language, and said to the people of Donbass and people of Crimea, come home, you're welcome, come back home. But recently we had this movement zakon, this language law that's diminishing the role of all languages, including Russian. I don't think it's a real invitation for the people to come back. Couldn't this law be a little bit softer to motivate people from all these areas to say, yeah, let's go back to Ukraine because it's our country and we can speak our language. There's a lot of articles around the world about that. So can you explain your position?
Sure. That law does not prohibit any individual from speaking his or her mother tongue, be it Russian or Polish or Hungarian or Romanian or Jewish or whichever. So in private life, in church activities, in some close association activities, even in the streets, even in cafes, in restaurants, everybody can use any language. What that law stipulated is that if a person, for example, comes to a restaurant or to a shop and he speaks in Ukrainian, the shop assistant or the barmaid must reply in Ukrainian, which is only natural. If you in Serbia come to a Serbian restaurant and they refuse to speak Serbian to you, that would be crazy. So the same in Ukraine. On the other hand, if a person comes in and speaks Russian and says, for example, I do not understand Ukrainian well, please serve me in Russian, he or she will be served in Russian, no problem at all. So that law is aimed to defend the Ukrainian language rather than to oppose any other languages. When we speak about the new draft law regarding the so-called коренные народы, I'm not sure about the term in English, but unlike national minorities, these other ethnic groups, so to speak, they have no mother nation. For example, Russian language has Russian Federation, where it has the official status. Hungarian language has the Republic of Hungary, where Hungarian is the official language. Crimean language has no official status in any other country because the Crimean Tatars do not have their own country. So that new law is meant to protect these small indigenous population that have no mother country where their language could be protected. Also, we should look at the experience of many other European countries. On the level of the Council of Europe, the term, the notion of national minority does not exist at all. It is not, there's no official definition of a national minority. There are countries like France, for example, who do not recognize at all any national minorities or any minority languages. But it's okay, it's a democratic country. So there's a lot of speculation here. Again, the war in Ukraine did not start because of language or religion, unlike on the Balkans. The war in Ukraine started for the reason that the Kremlin regime wants to reestablish the big Russian Empire, and they have a lot of problems inside of their own country. So by waging wars outside, they turn the attention of their own people from a very poor life that they have inside of Russia.
Do you think that Ukrainian language is endangered in a way?
Ukrainian?
Yes. I mean,
unfortunately,
half of the people are like 20 million people speak.
According to the recent opinion polls, 91% of the Ukrainians spoke in favor of the Ukrainian language as the only official language on the territory of Ukraine. In practical terms, in families, in private life, about half of Ukrainians still use Russian or they speak both. There are families where both languages can be spoken interchangeably, or there's this mixture of Russian and Ukrainian, this horrible surjik, so-called. The Ukrainian, I would not say that it is really endangered like the Irish language, the Gaelic language, for example, or some very small, indigenous groups language. But the Ukrainian language had been exterminated and forbidden, prohibited on the territory of Ukraine for many, many decades and centuries. While Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union, there were altogether about 36 different government acts prohibiting Ukrainian language on the territory of Ukraine. So only in the last 30 years of our independence, the language has begun its revival. So no wonder that people are very sensitive on that issue. So we are not nationalistic, we are patriotic, so to say.
But for example, I see the bilingual Ukraine as a good business opportunity, you know, because lots of companies in America, they put the headquarters in California or Texas, where people speak both English and Spanish, and there are people who can they don't have to open another headquarter in Mexico or in Colombia. They can do it directly from Austin, Texas, or Houston, or Sunnyvale, California. You know, the people speak. So isn't it good for the people, for Ukraine, to speak both languages perfectly? So the people can, from the West, for example, they bring a headquarter in Kiev somewhere, you know, and say, yeah, you're going to cover Belarus and Russia and Kazakhstan and anything else, because it's better for us to get one in Kiev than go to Moscow to open there. You know, isn't it a business opportunity to I would love the Serbs to speak, I don't know, every person to speak 2 languages, but unfortunately we don't do that.
There are 2 answers to your question. First, of course, I understand the motivation of the business community to have easy ways of establishing contacts with the local population. In that case, why not to have Ukrainian and English on the territory of Ukraine? Why should it be Russian? Why should foreigners learn 2 languages if they can learn just Ukrainian? But the other question, answer is from the purely scientific linguistic point of view. And since one of my education is linguistic, I know what I'm talking about. It is impossible for 2 languages on a given territory to coexist together, mixing with each other. With time, I will explain why. With time, one language will necessarily kill the other language. It's unavoidable. It's the law of linguistics. If you tell me, for example, look at Switzerland, look at Canada, look at Belgium, where they have 2, 3, or 4 languages, that is true. But all those languages, they are used within separate cantons or these communities, you know, like in Belgium. So they basically do not cross. Only government officials, doctors, policemen, they must know 2 or 3 languages. But otherwise, for example, German-speaking Swiss, some of them may know a little bit of French and the other way around. But it is not like in Ukraine. In Ukraine, it's a total schizophrenia in our heads, when you have at the same time Ukrainian and Russian. So with time, one language will necessarily win, not because of somebody's bad or evil will, but it's the law of linguistics. It's impossible to sustain it both.
I read this article. It was in Ukrainian, and I read it by you. You posted on Facebook a couple of months ago.
By the way, also if you look at Serbia, you have an excellent, you know, minorities policies, languages policies, especially in Vojvodina, where you have about 16 minorities and 13 languages. And one might think, okay, so people in Serbia speak 13 or 16 languages. No, they all speak Serbian, all of them, necessarily. They must speak Serbian. And in addition to that, of course, they can have their folklore in their own national language. So the same should be in Ukraine. Ukraine is not against minority languages, but it should not be at the detriment, at the expense of the Ukrainian language.
I understand, yes. We talked about economy now, about the economic opportunities. When I said about the headquarters, I meant both headquarters for Ukrainian language and Russian speaking to be in Ukraine, but just to clarify. How about the economy in Ukraine? How bad, you know, every country went bad through 2020, except for, I don't know, China a little bit, you know, they had a little growth, and like 10 countries had a little bit of growth, but everybody had a fall of GDP. How about Ukraine? What happened to Ukraine and Ukrainian economy? And what about the cooperation between Ukraine and Serbia? Is it bouncing back? Can we expect more of that?
First, about the economy of Ukraine as such, of course, it suffered like many economies across the world. We did have a decline in GDP last year. and a very small decline in the first quarter of this year, but we project already a much improvement for the rest of this year and for the next years. Of course, it all is connected to the pandemic and to the quarantine measures. We are lucky to have the association agreement and free trade area with the European Union. We should say we appreciate a lot a very constructive position of the EU, that especially during the pandemic, we both received some financial assistance from the EU, but also we had the opportunity to increase some of the quotas for our export, especially agricultural exports to the EU. So now our trade with the EU is almost half of all our trade. On the whole, yes, we did suffer, but it was not catastrophic. It was not dramatic. We did not receive the IMF assistance for over a year now, and we are just fine. We have improved our fiscal policies and taxation policies. So there's nothing, catastrophic in terms of economy. On the other hand, we keep seeing influx of foreign direct investments, and we are especially happy with our cooperation with the European Union and other European countries. As for the trade with Serbia, it peaked to over $400 million in 2019. Then it dropped to 320 million last year, and it is still not clear what will be the situation this year. Our major problem in trade between Ukraine and Serbia is not so much the pandemic as the structure of the Ukrainian exports. 80% of the Ukrainian exports to Serbia are iron ore and metals, which go to Železara Smederevo, which is excellent business for those companies. But once the demand for this product drops in the world, then it affects our bilateral trade. So I still hope that the bilateral negotiations to establish the free trade area between Ukraine and Serbia will bear fruit, because it will help a lot, especially to small and medium-sized enterprises which want to do business both in Ukraine and Serbia. Every day we receive requests from Ukrainian and Serbian companies from all kinds of industries who want to trade or to invest or to cooperate together. So there's no lack of interest. We need to speed up those negotiations to facilitate our trade.
Yeah, I know the people from the business people from Serbia buy wooden houses from Ukraine. Mm-hmm. They are very popular now after this 2 waves of pandemic. The people want to have the cottage in a country, and they want a wooden cottage, and Ukraine is an excellent producer of wooden cottages. They're much cheaper than brick houses, and it's a good business. And I know for sure, because I work with the company, and that the Serbian companies working with plastic, they buy a lot of PVC grains and powders and everything else too, because there are some companies very good and with competitive price in Ukraine, and a lot of things could be done with this free trade agreement. It could be. I know that a lot of interests and lots of questions I get from the business community about Ukrainian business, because I understand Ukrainian, I speak Russian, so I can easily communicate with the business people from Ukraine. So it's a great thing. A little bit of.
I'm sorry, just one other, just 2 more. I wish to mention 2 more companies, okay. Ukrainian companies which operate in the Serbian market. One of those is, of course, the Danube Shipping Company, which provides over 60% of all shipping across along the Danube, at least on Serbian territory. So it's one of the cheapest types of transport, and many, also Serbian companies, make use of the Ukrainian Danube Shipping Company. In addition to that, the Ukrainian one of the Ukrainian big agricultural companies purchased even earlier Perutnina Ptuj chicken chain in Slovenia, but which has also its capacities, industrial capacities in Serbia. So technically speaking, if you buy chicken in Serbian shops, it may be either Ukrainian chicken or made with Ukrainian money or Ukrainian equipment.
Great. And I tried to avoid the questions from the last interview that didn't change in nature, so we'll not do it twice. The last question is about the cultural cooperation, because I talked a lot with Mr. Miroslav Hočak from the Serbian Ukrainian Chamber of Trade and Economy, and what we really thought about as a good idea is to make a stronger cooperation. For example, making a film festival, a Ukrainian film festival in Serbia, because there are lots of Ukrainian films during the last 5 years or something that are really excellent. It's a boom of Ukrainian film industry, and I think these films deserve to be distributed all around the world and in Serbia, because we have a very similar sense of humor. For example, this Crazy Weddings, Skazene Vesilja, there are even 3 parts of that. You know, they should be, if not in the cinemas, or they should be bought by TV companies like Radio Televizija Serbia, Radio Televizija Vojvodina. They should broadcast it, you know, because it's really funny and they have exactly the same mentality and exactly the same humor. So can we do something about this, you know, because it's the best bridge, you know, the comedy, the music, it's the best bridge, film, whatever, dramatic films, you know, drama films, it's the best bridge between the 2 nations and 2 countries. Can we do something about that? You know, can you pull some strings to make this festival, for example?
Yes, we can do a lot about it. Thank you for this wonderful initiative. I fully support you and Miroslav Hočak in this endeavor. I should say that in the past years we had quite a number of Ukrainian films or by Ukrainian directors screened in Serbia within various film festivals, including the Belgrade Documentary Film Festival, which will take place this year in September, if I'm not mistaken, and there will be also Ukrainian films as well in their program. So it is also, we had excellent cooperation with RTV, Radio Television of Vojvodina, in showing, but this time even without translation, Ukrainian films and cartoon films within the Ukrainian programs in Vojvodina. But I agree with you, Ukrainian films have become very popular. They win prizes in various film festivals also across Europe. The idea to have an exclusively Ukrainian film festival in Serbia is definitely worth discussing. We need to discuss the issue of intellectual property rights, of course. We need to discuss the technical issues of translation and subtitling. So this is a project which we could realize together, not this year, but probably next year. But I fully support it, and I fully agree with you that our mentality is very similar. I talk a lot with Serbians. I have lots of friends, not only among politicians, and when we say jokes, when we sing songs, when we have, you know, sayings, proverbs, they are sometimes almost identical. And as a last remark, I wish also to recall the excellent performance by the Ukrainian Go-A group with their song Shum in Eurovision, which had become very popular not only in other European countries, but especially in Serbia.
Yeah,
and my Serbian friends told me that their style of performing, this folk style, is very similar to one particular region in Serbia. They could not pinpoint it, but they told me that they have similar way of
Eastern Serbia, where my parents are from, it's very similar to Eastern Serbia. It was really chilling for me to hear that, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's stay together and let's work on that project. Thank you for this initiative.
Great. Thank you, Alexander. That was my last question. All the other questions we covered in 2020. Now is lots of news from Ukraine. Ukraine is very dynamic, and you will be a wonderful guest. Thank you once again, and see you soon in life.
Thank you, Žikica. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Bye.